The first glitch I'm going to discuss as part of my fundamental series is also the most important and most groundbreaking exploit discovered to date. We call it contract warping.
They call it Halo.
Typically, to accept a contract in Mercenaries, you need to enter a particular faction's HQ and accept the contract from their leader. Contract warping allows us to instead directly teleport from the end of one contract to the start of the next contract in that faction's contract sequence. The way this is accomplished is by completing a contract and then, during the fadeout that occurs before the payment screen, do something to fail the contract. Typically, this involves turning the faction that gave you the contract hostile, either by killing their troops, killing civilians, blowing up their HQ, etc. Upon failing the contract in this fashion, the only thing you have to do to finish the warp is choose to restart. At this point, you'll be placed into the next contract in sequence for that faction. Some contracts also have items that are essential to the contract, and destroying them is another method for instantly failing during a fadeout. An example of this is the counterfeit cash machine during the Mafia's second contract, Gimme My Money. The MD-530 helicopter they provide during that contract is also essential. If either of these objects are destroyed during the fadeout prior to the payment screen, the contract will instantly fail. Another runner, Banter, discovered contract warping earlier this year on accident by killing Yosef at the end of the Mafia's 10th contract, Escort Service. As you can see, we don't need to actually accept the Mafia's next contract, Housekeeping, after failing Escort Service. We are automatically placed into it. At this point, if you quit Housekeeping and enter the Mafia HQ, you'll still only be able to accept Housekeeping. Furthermore, if you had chosen not to restart Escort Service at the payment screen and walked back into the Mafia's HQ, you'd still be offered Housekeeping. Escort Service has been completed, despite the game saying you failed it. This exploit was discovered and documented as early as 2013, but it wasn't widely known until Banter shared his discovery in the Discord server. The time-saving advantages of this are obvious, especially for contracts where the end point is far away from that faction's HQ. However, there are some additional considerations. While, to the best of our knowledge, the game is marking warped contracts as complete, evidenced by permanent changes in the game world like the bridge to Dang Dong being destroyed after Boom, it still treats things in the moment as though you failed the contract. This means that any number cars verified during the contract are reset, any collectibles acquired during the contract are reset, any money gained or lost during the contract is reset, and you do not receive payment for the contract. Any Merchant of Menace items typically granted from the contract are not unlocked, any faction reputation changes are reset, and any weapons you swapped out are reset. The current working theory is that, as soon as the final objective for a contract is completed, the game marks it as completed globally and triggers a fadeout. But the contract itself is not actually concluded until the payment screen is shown. So, during the fadeout between completing the final objective and getting paid, you could still fail the contract and prompt the game to restart it. When it tries to do so, it checks for what the current faction contract is, which has already been incremented, and places you into it. Because we have to execute this trick during the fadeout that occurs between completing the final objective and getting paid, contract warps are not possible in contracts where there's not a fadeout. In theory, it may be possible to execute a contract warp in a frame-perfect fashion during a contract without a fadeout, but no one in the community has been able to do so thus far. Most contracts have fadeouts by default, but some conditions can prevent fadeouts from occurring. For example, generally speaking, if you kill and verify any number cards during a contract, that contract's fadeout will be skipped. This doesn't affect runs though, because there's no reason to verify a number card during a contract you're warping out of. That verification would be reset anyway. Similarly, during face card contracts, if you kill and verify the HVT, there will not be a fadeout. This means that we need to capture face cards in order to warp out of these contracts. Additionally, as far as we know, none of the Ace contracts have fadeouts during which the player is in control, which prevents attempts to warp. I did get a fadeout one time after killing and verifying the Ace of Clubs, but no one has been able to reproduce this. To our knowledge, it is also not useful to execute contract warps when the next contract in sequence does not exist or takes place on another map. warps conducted under these circumstances can either crash the game, return you to the main menu, or place the player into a state we refer to as limbo. I'm not going to get too much into the specifics of limbo because it's not relevant to speedrunning, but basically the game puts you on a blank map with all of your progress reset, soft locking the game. For example, if you try to warp from South Korea's 6th contract with the Jack of Diamonds, Master of None, into South Korea's 7th contract, Repo Man, it will not work because these contracts take place in different provinces. You'll be placed into limbo. Similarly, warping out of Ante-Up, which takes place on a look-alike clone of the Southern Province map, can either crash the game, put you back at the main menu, or simply restart the contract. For these reasons, even if we could get a fade-out to occur reliably during an ACE contract, we suspect warping out of one would not be useful. To review, question: can you warp out of China's 10th contract, an eye for an eye, wherein you defend their artillery against an SK attack? The answer is yes. After completing the final objective and during the fade-out, you can turn China hostile or destroy the last standing artillery piece to trigger an instant mission failure and initiate a warp into their 11th contract, Choke Point. Question: can you warp out of the Ace of Diamonds contract, the Guns of Kirin Do? The answer is possibly, but probably not. To our knowledge, no ACE contract can be reliably warped out of because it's nearly impossible to get a fade-out where the player is in control. And, even if you were able to accomplish a warp, the game would likely crash or return you to the main menu. Question: can you warp out of China's King of Diamonds contract, Knock Knock? The answer is yes, if you capture, not kill, the king, but you'll be placed in limbo and soft lock the game. Question: can you warp out of South Korea's King of Clubs contract, A Farewell to Kings? The answer is yes, if you capture the king. You'll warp from A Farewell to Kings into South Korea's 4th contract, A Hot Time in Nampo. Note, this will skip the Ace of Clubs contract and instantly place you into the Diamonds chapter of the game. We call this ace skipping. This technique makes it possible to complete the game without capturing any club's number cards except the 2, or hearts number cards, because we don't need the intel required to start the ace contracts. Question: can you warp out of the Allies' 2nd contract, Out of the Woodwork, wherein you destroy NK troop tunnels? The answer is yes, but again, you'll be placed into limbo. We suspect this is because the ace contracts are considered allied contracts, so the next in sequence would be bringing down the house, Ace of Clubs, and that takes place on a different map. Contract warping is allowed in every category except for 100%. Ace skipping is not allowed in all contracts, all cards, for obvious reasons. The easiest and most common way to warp between contracts is to turn the faction you're working for hostile. If you start off at a very low mood, or even killing just one of that faction's soldiers would turn them hostile, you can repeatedly warp between contracts by turning them hostile during fade-outs. Since mood is reset after failing, the game will repeatedly set that faction's mood to whatever you started at, making it very predictable and easy to manage. In the next fundamentals video, I'll cover the basics of reputation and different techniques we use to manipulate the faction mood in the game.